In this episode, we talk about the impact of the recently passed One Big Beautiful Bill on your federal student loan journey. Let's get started.
Let's get some money.
From New Money, New Problems, it's the New Money, New Problems podcast, a show for successful professionals searching for the tools they need to navigate financial opportunities and obstacles they've never seen. Negotiating compensation, purchasing your first investment property, helping your family with money, the highs and lows of entrepreneurship. New Money brings new problems that require new solutions. Join us as we work through them together. I'm Brenton Harrison, and this is the New Money, New Problems podcast. Hello, my name is Brenton Harrison, and if you are listening to this podcast, it was recorded on Thursday, July 3rd, and on this day, the House passed the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, although I don't think that name survived the Senate. But you know what I mean. The Trump budget bill was passed by the House today. It was essentially the version that left the Senate that had some changes as it relates to several things, primary among them for this episode, the way that federal student loans were treated. So thankfully, we had already done a lot of work digging into the Senate changes as it relates to those loans, and we are prepared to give you an episode where we tell you the impact of what is about to occur. Now, because we have a lot of information to cover, we are going to split this up in a bit of a unique way. If you were listening to last week's episode of the New Money, New Problems podcast, we shared that for people of our email community, we've established a private podcast feed. There is no cost to access this feed. The only cost is your email address. So if you're already on our email list, you are going to get an email that gives you the link to that private feed. And in that feed, you're going to get essentially a part 2 of this episode, where in this feed, we're going to tell you, hey, here's what happened. On the private feed, we're going to tell you, here's what that means for your federal student loan journey. We just didn't want to have like another hour-long episode coming off of last 2 weeks' episodes. So there's nothing to do. If you're already on the email list, just wait and you'll get part 2 via email. If you are not already on our email list, then you can go to newmoneynewproblems.com/subscribe, and you also will be granted access to part 2 of this episode. So let's get started. The first thing I want to talk about in this episode are 2 different deadlines by which you may need to take certain types of action depending on the type of loans that you have or the type of payment plan that you're trying to end up with. And the first of those dates is July 1st, 2026. So we're going to talk about the 2 groups of people who need to pay attention to that date. The first group of people who need to pay attention to that date are people who have student loans that are not direct loans. And that's really important because direct loans are the only loans that are eligible for many of the income-driven repayment plans, but they're also the only loans that are eligible for public service loan forgiveness as well. Now, the good news is if you're under the age of 35, you probably already have direct loans only, but let's talk about the people who are in a different circumstance. If you have, for example, an FFEL loan or a Perkins loan that you want to be eligible for income-driven repayment plan forgiveness or public service loan forgiveness, you need to have consolidated those loans by July 1st of 2026. And the reason is, after that point in time, if you either consolidate your loans or apply for a new federal student loan, the only 2 options that you'll have for repayment are a standard repayment plan that, based on the amount that you owe, will be a repayment period of anywhere from 10 to 25 years, or the repayment assistance plan. Repayment assistance after July 1st, 2026 for new borrowers, which a consolidated loan would constitute a new borrower. You only have access to that plan in terms of income-driven repayment. That's it. Now, it's also important to understand that if you already have direct loans, you actually want to be very cautious in consolidating a student loan. We've talked about this in past episodes. During the Biden administration, they made a change where if you consolidated 2 or more loans that had previous credit towards income-driven repayment or public service loan forgiveness, they would give that newly consolidated loan credit based on the weighted average of the loans in the pot. There's no need to talk about, like how that works because it's another episode for another day. The problem is that prior to the Biden administration, we don't know if they're using those rules, but we think that they are using those pre-Biden era rules. If you consolidated student loans, it didn't matter how much credit you had towards forgiveness. that new loan was granted 0 credits. You had to start from scratch. And we've seen some people prior to those changes where they consolidated a loan that had 7, 8 years worth of credit towards public service loan forgiveness, unaware of the fact that once it was completed, they were starting from scratch. So if you don't have to consolidate your loans, you don't want to do it because we don't know what the circumstances will be in terms of that granted credit. The only scenario where you may potentially want to go ahead and pull the trigger is if you have that old FFEL or Stafford or Perkins loan that you're wanting to be considered. That's the first group that needs to pay attention by July 1st of 2026. The next group that needs to pay attention by July 1st of 2026 are Parent Plus borrowers. And this is huge, although it's not as devastating as it was originally proposed. Originally, what they were planning to do was, at the time this bill was passed, if you were not, by some people's interpretation, on the income contingent repayment plan for your Parent Plus loan, you would lose access to all income-driven repayment plans immediately, which also means you would lose access to public service loan forgiveness. Thankfully, they have extended that to July 1st, 2026. Another thing that they were proposing was they were not going to allow you to have a loan that was in forbearance put on that plan. They also were potentially not going to allow a double consolidated loan to be on those plans either. So it was just a really, really tricky way to try to navigate during that period of time. Here's where they landed in the final version of the bill that was passed today. If you have a double consolidated loan, if you have a Parent Plus loan that you've consolidated a single time, it really doesn't matter. As long as by July 1st, 2026, you are on an income-driven repayment plan, they will allow you to move on to either the old or new version of income-based repayment, which we'll talk about shortly, or the repayment assistance plan. So essentially, if you're in a position where you need to consolidate your Parent Plus loans in order to become eligible, you need to make sure that is done by July 1st, 2026. So it's a completely different circumstance than the group we just told to be very cautious. With Parent Plus borrowers, if you're not in a position to have that repayment plan, you need to take care of it immediately because you don't know how long it's going to take to do any consolidations or to move into a new repayment plan. So let's break that down into people based on their circumstance. If you have a Parent Plus loan that you've never consolidated, you only have to consolidate it one time in order to sign up for the income contingent repayment plan, which counts as an income-driven repayment plan and is eligible for public service loan forgiveness if that's what you're pursuing. Now, as odd as it sounds, based on the way federal student loans work, even if you only have one student loan, you can technically consolidate a single student loan. It's a very quick process as compared to trying to do a double consolidation, which is much more involved. If you have already done a double consolidation of your federal student loans, then I would sign up for the income-driven repayment plan with the lowest payment plan possible because eventually they're going to move you on to a plan that has a potentially higher payment. So that's July 1st, 2026. Now we're going to talk about a transition period from July 1st, 2026 to the second deadline, which is July 1st, 2028. July 1st, 2028 is the date by which all payment plans except the old and new versions of IBR and the repayment assistance plan will be phased out. What does that mean? That means that the income contingent repayment plan will be phased out. The SAVE plan is not going to be phased out. It's going to be done in very short order. And you also are going to see the pay-as-you-earn plan phased out. Now, they have not said specifically when that's going to occur. They're just saying that sometime between 2026 and 2028, they're going to transition anybody from those plans that are no longer available into either IBR or the repayment assistance plan. Now, there's a lot of things that are important there. The first is, let's talk about who's eligible for which plan. As a recap, if you are on either pay-as-you-earn or new income-based repayment plan, the payment that you're making is 10% of your discretionary income, and the repayment period is 20 years. If you are only eligible for the old version of income-based repayment plan, then you have to pay 15% of your discretionary income for 25 years. Repayment assistance plan is one that we're actually going to touch on in a later episode. We'll go into detail about how that plan works, but just know that that's a 30-year repayment period that in many cases for high income earners carries a higher payment than all of the other options that we just mentioned. So in order of like priority or in order of convenience, it goes at the top, pay as you earn and new IBR are the ideal plans. Right under that, old IBR is less appealing, but more appealing in most cases than the repayment assistance plan. Now, in the original proposal, in both the House and the Senate, they were going to do away with the new version of income-based repayment. And regardless of whether you were typically eligible for that plan, everybody was going to be stuck with the old version of IBR, 5% higher payment, 5-year longer repayment period. Now, thankfully, after the Senate parliamentarian spoke up and said you can't just strip borrower protections like that in a way that doesn't impact spending, they modified the bill to say that they are going to keep the new version of income-based repayment for those who are actually eligible. Who's eligible for that plan? People who are considered new borrowers as of July 1st, 2014. So essentially, if you're someone who's in your early 30s or younger, you are likely eligible for new IBR. If you are not in that group, then you may be eligible for pay-as-you-earn and old IBR, but you're definitively eligible for old IBR. So the good news is they're keeping new IBR on the table for people who are eligible. The bad news is they are not opening it up to a new group of borrowers. So if you're mid-30s or older, after July 1st, 2028, you're going to be stuck with either repayment assistance plan or the old version of IBR. Now, what about SAVE forbearance? There are many people out there who signed up for the SAVE plan. They've been in an administrative forbearance for a long period of time. They haven't had to make payments. Well, this bill has made it clear that not only will that plan be phased out immediately, but at some point in time, and they haven't shared when, people on the SAVE plan are going to be transitioned to the old or new version of income-based repayment based on what they're eligible for. So again, they haven't shared a date, but we now know what they plan to do with these borrowers. At some point in time, maybe a year from now, but maybe 2 months from now, they're going to say, hey, you didn't have to make a payment, but now we're going to ask you to be on old IBR or new IBR. My fear would be that there are some people who have a student loan payment right now that was calculated under SAVE using a tax return that they maybe had from 2 or 3 years ago and were making way less money. We don't know if when they switch to IBR, they're going to make you immediately recertify your income, which could lead to potentially like immediate and significant increase in payments. That's something that may be down the line, but just be aware that this is the process that they're planning to follow in that transition. Now, as it relates to the income-based repayment plan itself and the people that they're moving on to this plan, they've also made a slight change that doesn't impact a huge portion of people, but it does impact some people. And that is that they remove the partial hardship requirement for the income-based repayment plan. As a recap, a partial hardship means that when you are applying to recertify your income or applying for the very first time, they're going to look at the payment plan that you're signing up for, and they're going to calculate your payment under that plan, and they're going to compare it to what it would cost to repay your loans in full over a 10-year standard repayment schedule. So let's say, for example, that they calculate my payments under the old version of IBR, and they find out that my payment is $1,000 a month. And then they look at how much it would take to pay off my loans in full, and it would cost $1,200 a month to pay off my loans in full over a 10-year period. Well, that means that I have a partial hardship. It would cost me more to pay it back under a 10-year payment schedule than it would to simply sign up for the income-based repayment plan, and they would allow me to move forward. Now, let's say that it were reversed. We calculate the payment under that plan, and the 10-year payment is $1,000 a month, but the IBR payment is $1,200 a month. Well, in that scenario, I don't have a hardship. It would not save me any money to be on that plan. And as a result, if I were applying on the front end, they would reject me. They would not allow me to sign up for that plan. If I had already been accepted into the plan because I had a hardship at the time of application, and maybe in a future year when I recertified my income, I lost my hardship, they wouldn't kick me off the plan, but they would bump my payment down to the 10-year standard payment, and they would give me credit towards forgiveness since I had originally been accepted. And this used to be a requirement of not just income-based repayment, but also pay-as-you-earn. Now, they don't have to remove it for pay-as-you-earn as a requirement because eventually that plan's going away. But if they're moving towards a system where the only plans available are IBR or repayment assistance plan, it doesn't make sense to still have that hardship requirement. So they have taken that away in this Senate bill, and anybody will be able to get on this plan moving forward, even if their payment is higher than the 10-year standard plan. And if you're asking why someone would do that in the first place, it may be that they're really close to forgiveness under income-driven repayment or public service loan forgiveness. And rather than being on a standard plan and not getting credit, they would want to say, well, even though I'm paying a little more in the interim, I'm still going to save money in the long run if I can knock out these last 2 or 3 years on the plan and have my loans wiped away. So those are the two major elements of the deadline. Now let's talk about some elements of the plan itself that may not be time stamped or time sensitive, but are still worth knowing. One of those being how married filing separately borrowers are treated under the repayment assistance plan. As a recap, what they were proposing was in the House and Senate versions of the bill originally, the repayment assistance plan did not allow you to exclude your spouse's income from payment calculations no matter how you filed your taxes, which is a departure from all other income-driven repayment plans that people use with any level of consistency, because those plans allowed you to exclude your spouse's income if you filed your taxes married filing separately. The Senate parliamentarian also ruled in on this, and the Senate changed the final version of the bill to say that the repayment assistance plan will allow you to exclude your spouse's payments if you file your taxes separately. There are some scenarios where it may benefit you to do the repayment assistance plan if you file your taxes married filing separately, although generally it's not the greatest plan. But having this option available, especially if you're a new borrower after July 1st, 2026, and RAP is the only plan that you have access to, is definitely a welcome change as compared to what they were originally trying to do. Next up, medical and dental residency. They had originally proposed that medical and dental residents, for some reason, would not be able to get access towards public service loan forgiveness during the years that they were in training. Thankfully, they have changed their mind on that after the parliamentarian ruled in, and they are now going to retain your ability or preserve your ability to get credit towards public service loan forgiveness during medical and dental residency. We also see a change in forbearance. So right now, you can have many reasons why you would file for a forbearance and put a pause on your student loan payments. I would say the most consistent one that you see is an economic hardship forbearance, where you are saying, without really having to prove much in terms of why, that, hey, I can't afford my payment right now, and as a result, I want to put it on pause. They would allow you to put it on pause for up to a year straight and up to 3 years in total. And to be transparent, they really weren't checking. So I know people who have been in forbearance for years and years because their loan servicer didn't come back after that 12-month period or didn't check to see if it had been more than 36 months cumulatively. And also, once you consolidate a loan, you get a fresh 3 years of credit for that period of time. Now, they are changing it so that you cannot exceed 9 months of forbearance in any 24-month period. And they are also doing away with economic hardship forbearance. So you no longer have the ability to just say, I can't afford it, put my loans on pause. If that was the case, they would simply push you onto either the IBR plan or the repayment assistance plan. And they are also doing away with forbearance specifically for unemployment. So you used to be able to say, I lost my job, put my payments at zero. They're doing away with that as well, although that isn't something I would be concerned about, because I actually discourage people from filing for forbearance when they're on unemployment. Because if you'll remember, under all the income-driven repayment plans, you can update your income as often as possible if it can impact your student loan payment. So if you were unemployed, I would say, hey, just, tell your loan servicer to recalculate your payment, have it calculated at zero, and you'll still get credit towards income-driven repayment plan forgiveness. So they're taking away that option in terms of unemployment forbearance, but that's one that I'm less concerned about because I don't think it was typically the best path forward in the first place. But it is a change or a departure from the way that it's currently treated. Next up, when it comes to loans that you haven't been able to pay. If you remember, we talked about student loan default, which means that you have a student loan payment or payments that are at least 270 days late. It is a terrible economic circumstance. They can garnish your wages, they can garnish your Social Security, they can garnish your tax refund, depending on your state. They can rescind or suspend your professional licenses, which means you wouldn't be able to work in your field of choice. You wouldn't be able to get approved for a government-backed mortgage or a government-backed loan. Like I said, it's just a terrible, terrible circumstance. Based on current law or guidelines, the ways that you would get out of it is either you would pay the loan back in full, you would consolidate the loan, which would restore some of your privileges in terms of borrowing, but it wouldn't remove the default from your credit report. Or you could go through a process called rehabilitation, where over a 9 or 10 month period, you make a certain amount of payments. They will not only restore your rights and privileges, but they will formally remove the defaulted status from your loans. But you could only go through student loan rehabilitation once. Well, based on these new guidelines, they are allowing you to go through student loan rehabilitation up to 2 times. So hopefully this doesn't impact you. Definitely hope that you wouldn't be impacted where you were in default 2 separate times. But if for some reason that were to occur, you can now go through rehabilitation twice as compared to doing it once under current regulations. And lastly, and this one, in addition to all the things that we just talked about, is definitely going to have like a radical change in terms of how we prepare for like the possibility of student loan forgiveness. And that has to do with the fact that this bill does not extend the freeze as basically not treating forgiven federal student loans as taxable income in the year of forgiveness. What do I mean by that? Prior to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, let's say that you made $100,000 and in the year that your student loans were forgiven, you had $200,000 worth of student loans forgiven. Well, when you filed your taxes for that year, it would make it look like you earned $300,000 of taxable income, which was a huge deal because the $100,000 that you actually earned, you likely had your employer withhold some taxes or you put some money aside to cover them on that portion of your income. Whereas the $200,000 worth of student loans that were forgiven that are now treated as income, you didn't have anybody put money aside from that. So if that led to a $40,000 or $50,000 tax bill, you were sitting there with a $40,000 or $50,000 tax bill trying to figure out how to pay it. Now, as a part of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, they put a freeze on that. And at least at the federal level, until the end of, until the start of 2026, if you had your loans forgiven under the income-driven repayment plan, you would not have to worry about taxes on that income at the federal level. Now, there are some states who would still tax it as income at the state level, but at least at the federal level, there was some reprieve. So it took away the responsibility, at least during this period of time, of what we had to do in the past, where it's like, hey, you can't just have your student loans forgiven and not think about the impact. You have to simultaneously project how much is forgiven and put aside money to cover a potential tax bill. Well, since they have not extended that freeze, we're now back in that mode where you can't just look and say, ooh, congrats, I'm gonna pat myself on the back or give myself a hug because I'm getting $100,000 or $200,000 or $300,000 worth of student loans forgiven. We're now having to say, if it's forgiven under public service loan forgiveness, you're all good. There's no taxation for federal student loans that are forgiven through that program. But if it's forgiven through general income-driven repayment plan forgiveness, you need to have done some foreplanning. And the way that you typically do that is through non-qualified, or in other words, non-retirement investments, where you do some projecting of how much you would potentially owe in taxes, and you do the best you can to save up to cover that potential expense in the event that it impacts your taxes down the line. So there's a lot of things that we're going to cover over the next few weeks and months as it relates to other areas of impact for this bill. But this is the information that we have for you thus far. Our goal is to make sure that we do the best we can to have your student loans forgiven, reduced, reorganized, or expedited. This is our first stab in making sure you're aware of the way that this is going to change the repayment portion of your federal student loan journey. And we will have more information for you in the weeks to come. And if you're looking for what this means in terms of your specific next steps, a reminder to join our email community and access that private feed so you can hear what your potential best next steps might be.
Let's get some money.
From New Money, New Problems, this was the New Money, New Problems podcast, a show for successful professionals searching for the tools they need to navigate financial opportunities and obstacles they've never seen.